One of the reasons I've made this my life mission to talk about rocking workplaces is because I did at one time work in a Dilbert-like workplace where you couldn't make up some of the stuff that happened. It was this soul-sucking, fun-sucking workplace. So I decided to talk about how work should not be sucking the life out of us.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torok. My guest today is Michael Kerr. Here's 3 facts that I believe you should know about Michael. 1, he spent more than 20 years traveling the world, researching, writing, and speaking about inspiring workplace cultures. 2, in 2008, he was inducted into the Canadian Speaking Hall of Fame. And 3, he's the author of at least 8 books, including The Jerk-Free Workplace and The Humor Advantage, Why Some Businesses Are Laughing All the Way to the Bank. Gee, I want to be one of those ones laughing to the bank, not crying when I leave. Michael, welcome to Your Intended Message.
Hey, thank you, George. It is awesome to be here. I love how you said I'm the author of at least 8 books. At least 8 books. It could be 100, folks. We don't know, but it's at least 8.
There could be ones that you haven't claimed the title, the authorship to, but they're out there waiting for you to just stick your name on it.
Exactly.
And I hear there's more coming out of the back room any minute now.
I will be writing more books. So yes, we can go with at least 8.
Let's take a look at the concept of the humor advantage.
Yeah.
What advantage is there from humor? And how do we take advantage of that, especially in the workplace?
Yeah, the book lays out an incredibly, I think, well-articulated argument that there's a huge advantage that businesses around the world, teams who leverage their humor resources, have lower employee turnover rates, lower absenteeism rates, less stress in the workplace. People work more collaboratively. There's more creativity and more innovation. You can stand out with your customer service. It helps brand you. So there truly are all these benefits to infusing your workplace with humor. And as I like to tell people, there's kind of a chicken and egg relationship here, right? Because humor both helps us build a better workplace, but it also reflects a healthy, positive workplace. So we know at a company-wide level, huge advantage to using humor in your workplace. At an individual level, there's a huge advantage. We know, it's not rocket science, George, right? We like people who have a healthy sense of humor. We want to work with them. We trust people more, according to the research, who have a healthy sense of humor. Humor can help us manage our stress, maintain a more positive attitude, and yes, as you said, it can help us be way more effective when it comes to communicating with other human beings. It's a hugely valuable resource for helping us connect and communicate.
Now, Michael, in your research, have you found more companies, more workplaces that just don't have enough humor? Is that why they're coming to you? Is that why they're talking to you? They're saying like, our people just aren't funny. Michael, can you help them?
Well, it's not so much. And this is one of the things I emphasize, right? It's not about really being funny. Having a sense of humor isn't about being a stand-up comedian or the office clown. It's about just being more human, more real, more authentic. It's about learning to laugh at the things you can't control, which especially these days is quite a bit. It's about especially laughing at yourself. And is it not a truism, George, that the more seriously a person takes themselves, the less seriously we tend to take that person, which I always find a little bit ironic, right? Because people take themselves seriously in the hopes that everyone is going to take them seriously, when the reality actually becomes, we're not taking you seriously, bucko, because you're taking yourself so ridiculously seriously. So it's about laughing at ourselves in order to do our jobs more effectively and being even more professional. But back to the point of your question, yes, some not so much because of that. It's because more they recognize they need to work on their culture. They need to create a more positive, inspiring culture, and they recognize one of the ways of doing that, just one of the ways of doing that, is to infuse more humor, more fun into their work environment. But I also get hired by a lot of companies who already have high levels of humor and fun. I think that's also a truism, right? It's often the people that need us the most don't sometimes use our services, whereas it's the really successful teams, organizations, leaders that want to be even more successful that tend to hire our services.
The ones are starving for a reason.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Culture. Now, it's curious. I noticed on the bookshelf behind you there is Dilbert's Boss from the Dilbert, and when it comes to being funny, certainly the cartoon Dilbert is funny. However, the Boss, I don't think he ever is intentionally funny, although he is the butt of a lot of the humor in that. Is that something that you notice in the workplace, that people laugh at the boss behind the boss's back?
Well, depending on the culture, depending on the effectiveness of the boss, yes, absolutely. It's a huge source of humor. And I actually talk about this notion of Dilbert cartoons as a red flag in a workplace, how you could almost there could almost be a study where you measure the amount of Dilbert cartoons in a workplace and correlate that to how healthy your culture is, or even just measure the understanding and resonance of Dilbert cartoons compared to people's culture, right? In other words, I think the people who really get the Dilbert cartoons, a lot of them are probably not working in very positive, healthy workplaces, right? Whereas if you're working in a rocking workplace, you probably read Dilbert cartoons and think, well, that's crazy. Nobody would work in that kind of environment. And in fact, one of the things I often say is, one of the reasons I've made this my life mission to talk about rocking workplaces is because I did at one time work in a Dilbert-like workplace where you couldn't make up some of the stuff that happened. It was this soul-sucking, fun-sucking workplace. So I decided to talk about how work should not be sucking the life out of us.
And it's funny, I too have worked in places like that, and so when I saw the title of your most recent book, number 8, where, as we believe, the jerk-free workplace, I thought, well, that's got to be fiction, right?
Well, maybe it's an aspirational goal, George, but I do believe it is attainable. I really do. Yes.
How does one obtain a jerk-free workplace? Is that like a Zen thing?
No, I think it's a tolerance thing. I think you don't tolerate jerks in your workplace. And to start with, you get your hiring right. I stress this. This is so important. Companies have to invest in their hiring like never before. So don't hire jerks to begin with. Take the time to get your hiring right. Hire relentlessly for attitude and emotional intelligence. Hire relentlessly to make sure these people are going to fit your culture and help your culture grow. So make sure you're not hiring jerks, and then set the expectations. Make sure you have proper onboarding and training, and that you're relentlessly committed to building the kind of culture where it is clear that you do not tolerate jerk-like behavior, which means you have to define jerk-like behavior, you have to talk about it, and you have to make sure everybody is responsible for how they behave, responsible for the attitudes they bring into work.
If your hiring is trying to filter out, keep out the jerks, does that mean we're looking for humor in the hiring process? Would that be one indicator? Someone, especially if, as you, if they are able to laugh at themselves, and that's got to be quite vulnerable. Imagine you're being hired, you're being interviewed to be hired, and the strength it would take to laugh at something you did or said.
Yes, absolutely, George. In fact, my last book, Hire, Inspire, and Fuel Their Fire, How to Recruit, Onboard, and Train New Employees to Live Your Culture Out Loud, talks just about the importance of hiring with humor and for humor. In fact, you go back to a company like Southwest Airlines, I think was one of the first companies to really embrace this notion of humor, that embrace this philosophy that, work is hard enough. Let's make it fun. Let's make sure we work with people who are fun. And they set that very clear in their recruiting campaigns that used a lot of humor in how they hired people. They made it right from the CEO on down. They made it clear, we don't want to work with jerks. Yes, if we're hiring pilots, you have to be able to fly the plane. Okay, we need to make sure that you can do that. But if you're a jerk and you can fly a plane, we don't want you here. This isn't the company for you. So you go back to, I think, maybe the 80s or 70s, even Southwest Airlines in interviews, they would be known to do things like when they're interviewing pilots, people would come in all nicely dressed in their suit to impress the interviewer. And during one interview, they were known to pull out a pair of boxer shorts and say, wouldn't you be more comfortable if you, did the rest of the interview in this, just to gauge the person's reaction, right? And whether they could take themselves a little lightly. I have the example of Clark Construction Company, where during the middle of a job interview, they will suddenly ask questions like this. So our next question for you, George, is a penguin walks into the room right now, and the penguin's wearing a sombrero. Why is the penguin here, and what does he say? And they ask that question, right? It's a weird question, but they ask that just to kind of gauge if the person can think on their feet, how comfortable they are, and if they can laugh a little bit, and if they have a little bit of a sense of humor. And so if they take themselves too seriously, that's a pretty good way of filtering some of those people out. It's not the only way, but it's something, right?
Yeah. Who asked for the two cervezas?
There you go. You got the job. You're hired, George.
I can't fly a damn plane. Now, there's a danger in humor. For example, for one thing, it makes you vulnerable. If you laugh, or especially if you laugh at the wrong time. So there is a danger. How does someone get past that danger, and what can a workplace do to make it okay to laugh, even if it's the wrong time?
Right. Yeah, and so many companies are worried about this, and where is that proverbial humor line, right? And I think the humor line looks a little something like this, right? It's a pretty hard sucker to define. So, of course, everything I talk about in my book, everything I talk about to audiences is about practicing positive, safe humor for the most part, right? Humor that laughs with people, not at people. Humor that especially laughs at ourselves, because if you laugh at yourself, you take away everyone's ability to laugh at you because you beat them to the punchline. It's about, again, laughing at those things we have no control over, and just recognizing that I think you get the kind of humor in a workplace that reflects your culture. So if you have a positive, respectful, trusting culture with open and honest communication, then for the most part, your humor is going to reflect that. It's going to be more positive, open humor. If you work in a very toxic, dysfunctional workplace culture, though, where people are mean to each other and there's bullies and there's a lack of trust, then your humor is probably going to be pretty subversive and sarcastic and sometimes rude and sometimes bullying. So it's about setting those guidelines and just saying, hey, we want to have fun. We value, it's one of our core values here at our company. But let's remember that still we need to respect each other. We need to build relationships with each other. So let's make sure we're using as much as possible positive humor. Humor researchers actually categorize humor into 4 different categories, and 2 of the categories are very negative humor, 2 of them are very positive. So we want to work on those positive styles of humor, especially as a leader. Now, having said all that though, George, there is a study in the International Group of Humor Studies, of which I am a member, where they looked at the role of the office joker, right? The proverbial office joker that so many workplaces have. And what they found was that person tends to play an incredibly important role in maintaining morale, in building trust, in even challenging senior leadership with tough questions, but in a funny way, right? And in keeping the culture alive, because what they found was that those office jokers were the people who tended to retell stories of the old days, right? So they kind of keep that culture, that history alive. But what was fascinating about the study was when the CEOs were asked about the office joker in their company and said, well, aren't there times when the office joker oversteps? And every one of them said, of course there are, absolutely. And you know what, when they overstep the line, they know they've overstepped, and we'll just go have a conversation with them and say, hey, you know, Joe, you probably know that was, yeah, I'll apologize. But every CEO to a T said, but you know what? The benefit of the office joker outweighs that very occasional misstep. And I think that's the attitude we have to embrace. We have to be so careful that we're paranoid about using any humor, that all of a sudden our workplaces are going to just run amok, and there's going to be total anarchy and chaos if we open up the humor door. That's just nonsense. And so many great organizations that I've interviewed about their use of humor, that use high levels of humor, when I've asked them that question, they always just look at me like I have three heads. It's not a problem in our workplace. It's just not. It's just not, because we have a positive, respectful culture.
I'm reminded now. You mentioned the workplace joker. I'm reminded of the courts of old when the kings had a fool to both entertain the king, but I believe the fool played a bigger role than just simple entertainment. Can you tell us about playing the fool?
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about that in my book, You Can't Be Serious, the role of the court jester, where they were very much, sometimes they were a confidant of royalty. They were a trusted advisor as well, and sometimes had one of the few people that had the ear. And so they did play a role in speaking truth to power. And that's still an important role. And you consider people like Jon Stewart of The Daily Show, right? That was his role. He was a modern day court jester, kind of poking holes in powerful people and politicians and leaders, and trying to find the truth, but through humor. And that's something I advise leaders to do too, is to listen between the punchline. Rather than getting your back up or getting offended if you see people posting Dilbert cartoons, say, or you find out you were the butt end of a joke, rather than immediately getting your back up, which I know not necessarily easy to do, instead listen between the punchlines to what's being communicated. What are people trying to say with that black humor, with that subversive humor? Because they're trying to communicate a message, chances are, when they're using that type of humor. And it probably is a red flag that you need to talk about some stuff. So rather than get offended, use it as an opportunity to open up some communication in your workplace and have a good conversation.
Now, interesting point. I remember one of the workplaces where I worked for a few years. There generally it was a good place to work. However, there was this one issue, a nepotism issue, and which nobody talked about out loud. And so what happened was that someone every once in a while would post a cartoon on the bulletin board in the lunchroom. And, some people think that someone was me. And I thought they were funny cartoons, and they were appropriate, and you could probably say that they were subversive. And right. And so, however, what you just said about listening between the punchline, I believe that management wasn't listening between the punchlines, because the issue still never got addressed or discussed, or no one said, come on, okay, I'm seeing this humor, and you're right, or something, or stop doing that.
Yeah, obviously there's an issue there, but I think that happens a lot, right? Where this is the response, or this. But if we're going to be effective leaders, one of the things we have to do is build a culture of psychological safety in our workplaces, on our teams, where people are free to speak their minds, are free to speak up, are free to voice their concerns, to ask challenging questions, to suggest outrageous ideas. And all of that does tie back to humor, because the more comfortable people just are. We know on that note, George, that studies in Scientific America, even from a University of Israeli study, several studies have shown that meetings that have high levels of humor and fun and bantering and joking around in them tend to be more effective meetings, because people feel more free to speak up and have better, richer conversations. And they drive more creative conversation, because we know there's a ton of research that shows that ha plus ha equals aha. There's a huge correlation between fun and humor and play and being more creative. It helps us look at things in a different way. It keeps that seagull voice at bay that craps all over each other's ideas and helps us be more open to the possibilities. So there's this huge benefit in opening up honest, positive, real communication in the workplace when we embrace humor.
Michael, I take it that humor goes beyond simply telling a joke.
Yeah.
What are other techniques that people might use to introduce more humor, for example, into corporate meetings? You know, we've got the weekly meeting or the monthly meeting, and we want to build a team. How can the team leader introduce humor into that meeting?
Yeah, and that's a really valuable place to do it, George, I think, because meetings are one of those touch points in organizations that are one of the key places to help you build the culture that you want, but also reflect your desired culture. So if you want a fun, open, innovative culture, your meetings sure as heck better be fun, open, and innovative. So to your point, yeah, it's not about telling jokes. Sure, it can be sometimes. You think of a clever joke in the moment, that can work wonders to break the tension. But there are all sorts of ways. In fact, I have a list on my website of over 100 ways, including with virtual meetings, to inject a little fun into your meeting. So I'm a huge fan of opening up meetings with a short, fun, simple icebreaker to set the tone, right? To set the psychological safe space for richer conversations, to relax people and to put people in the present. Because we've all had that experience. You race into a meeting, you're late, you're flustered, you're thinking about this argument you just had with a coworker, the 87 emails you have to get to. So where's your mind, right? You sit down in your boardroom, but your mind isn't there still. Your mind is back there somewhere. So doing something fun, playful, puts meeting participants in the room. It puts them present in the moment. There's so many benefits to doing it. So there's all sorts of simple things you could do. It could just be a whirlwind question where you go around and ask everybody just a fun offbeat question. It could be everybody wearing an alter ego name tag where you ask everybody, and it could be something like, everybody just put your middle name down on the name tag, or what your next dream destination to travel is. Just something to break the ice. It could be a theater improv game where you stand up for just 2 minutes and you pass an imaginary energy ball to one another to get people laughing. It could be something like, I love this, to increase the energy in a meeting, name in the hat game. And it just works like this. You literally have a hat there, and the rules are, anytime anyone in your meeting, and you can do this virtually too, you have to, figure out the logistics, but you can do it virtually. Every time anybody says something particularly funny or pithy or insightful or thoughtful, kind of one of those like aha moments, you go, Susan, that was brilliant. I'm nominating, I'm putting Susan's name in the hat. You put Susan's name in the hat. Susan can get her name in the hat as many times as she says something pithy, funny, or thoughtful. And you do that throughout the meeting, and it's just a way of keeping everybody engaged. And then you do a door prize at the end of the meeting for whoever's name ended up in the hat, and you give away a little prize. So there's all sorts of ways you can inject a little bit of humor. We used to have, when I was leading meetings many, many lifetimes ago, we used to have the rumor mill section in our meetings as a way of not just upping the fun, because it was always fun. And here's how it worked. You had to lean into the table. You had to look up and down kind of secretively and then whisper, word on the street is, and then say your rumor. And it was goofy, but here's what it did. It made it safe for people to bring up things that they might have been uncomfortable bringing up otherwise. We also used to have a wine and cheese section when we were undergoing lots of change. Now, not wine like this, but wine like this, where you were allowed we had the wine zone. So for 10 minutes, you were allowed to free for all to just, okay, who has a big wine? They want to just vent wine. But we always encourage people to whine in an exaggerated, funny way, just to get it out of their system. But then we wanted to bottle the wine. Very clever. So the rule was whine now or forever hold your peace. We don't want people whining in the hallways. We don't want people whining to other teams, other departments. Whine now, get it out of your system. We'll have this little cathartic whine and just have a few laughs at the same time. So there are literally hundreds of ways of injecting a little fun, injecting a little humor into meetings. You know, doing with the virtual meetings, one thing I'm a big fan of, and by the way, I've got my you're on mute coffee mug here, George. But one of the things I do with all my virtual meetings is a drinking game. So if everybody has their water, their tea, their juice, or whatever refreshing beverage, you just throw out a few words that are going to be the words of the meeting. So every time somebody says the word pivot, the new normal, or you're on mute, everybody has to take a big exaggerated drink, right? And again, it's just something a little silly, but it keeps people awake and alert and having a little fun.
How do you help the boss who thinks that all their jokes are funny? and I timed it just as you're taking a drink there, Michael.
Do a spit take? What? You mean the Michael Scott from The Office, that kind of boss?
Yeah.
Yeah. Who? Well, it's a tricky question, right? Because it's not necessarily an issue. If the boss if the jokes are harmless, if the boss means well, if it's coming from a good place, if it's clearly coming from their heart and they mean well, then, you know, it's not an issue. We could probably politely laugh, you know, and on that note, right, we have to always consider that we are essentially voting when we laugh at things in the workplace. We laugh through our vote. So if somebody says a really sexist joke or comment that they think is funny in a meeting and you laugh, you're voting for that sexist behavior, right? So there is power in our response to humor as well. So if the boss's humor though is harmless, then, you know, is it a big deal? Do we need to do anything? I think it's just those times where they think they're funny, but they are crossing that line a little bit and maybe offending people. And that's when you need somebody to be a brave truth teller and sit down in a comfortable place, probably not in the boss's office, in neutral territory, and just with a cup of coffee and just say, can I talk to you about, you know, what you said, and be specific, you know, bring up the example and just say, you know, sometimes I know you want to come from a good place, but I think sometimes a few people are finding your humor a little offensive, and here's why, explain why. And hopefully they'll, if you present it in a constructive way and offer to help them, then hopefully they will take it in the spirit that it was intended. But if it's coming from a harmless place, then you know, I don't, because and what we do have to be careful of as bosses, as leaders though, is remember there is a difference between a boss laughing at their employees versus employees laughing at the senior management. Because there's always this power differential, or often a power differential when it comes to humor, right? So it's one thing to poke, and say that this comes out, say, when you're doing a company retreat and you're having one of those maybe skit nights where you're doing these goofy exercises. Everybody loves to see the bosses taken down a notch, right? To have humor poked at them. And that's when you as the boss want to be the target. You want to put yourself out there and say, I'm the punching bag, I'm the punchline, go for it, have some fun at my expense. What does not work is if the senior leadership team goes out there and starts doing really aggressive humor aimed at the frontline employees, because they have the power already. And that kind of humor that deflates, that pokes fun at power, we've got to be aware of the dynamics of that relationship.
Humor can bring people closer together if it's directed at those who appear to have more power. But when the powerful person directs the humor at those with less power, it does the opposite.
That's an excellent way of saying it. I wish I had said it that way. Yes.
it's
Yeah, yeah,
it's my analytical side.
yeah. No, for sure. Right?
Michael, you mentioned, you teased us with the offer of 100 ways to inject humor into your meetings, and that's at your website. Let's let people know where that is. It's mikekerr.com, and Mike and Kerr is KERR.com, mikekerr.com, and that link will be in the description as well. Also, when they're there at your website, they can, if they'd like to hear from you weekly with weekly ideas, they can hear from your newsletter, Inspiring Workplaces. They can sign up right there.
Yes, you bet. And if you do sign up, you'll get a free copy of the ebook, 340 Ways to Put Humor to Work.
340 ways. Wow. That sounds like it sounds like a whole year's worth of funny every day. Get up. Oh, next page.
There you go.
There we go. And the book, The Jerk-Free Workplace, that is available. Where can people find that?
It is at the printers as we speak doing this interview, George. It is due out on about February 5th or thereabouts. So if you Google The Jerk-Free Workplace book, you will find it. It'll be on my website, and people will be able to buy it on Amazon and all the usual suspects. You can download it as an ebook. And I am making this offer. If your company buys 25 or more of that book, I will offer a free virtual Q&A, meet the author of The Jerk-Free Workplace for your team.
Or could you also help people get rid of the remaining jerks in the company?
I know some people. just
know someone who knows someone who could take care of that for us.
Yeah, I know someone.
Michael, it's time to wrap up, and it's appropriate that we wrap up with a laugh. If you could give 1, 2, or maybe 3 ideas, or perhaps even a reminder to leaders out there especially during this time of pandemic, how they can connect better with their workforce, which is probably dispersed. What techniques or ideas might they use to just inject a little bit more humor and fun, and to keep people motivated, happy to work with you? Just get through this.
Yeah. Well, one of the most important things I'm telling leaders right now is we know, even during normal, quote unquote, normal times, if there's ever such a thing, that just the simple act of checking in with your employees is incredibly powerful. One of the most effective things you can do as a leader is just check in. And remember, there's a difference between checking up on employees, especially when they're working remotely, and checking in on an employee. So genuinely checking in on employees, even when you don't talk about work, has been shown to boost morale, to increase trust. So making sure you're just, during these times, extra intentional about doing that. Put it in your calendar. Schedule X number of calls per day and check in with your people. It is so, so critical. One thing you can do that I know some leaders are doing very, very well, and if you're not comfortable with this, just start. I urge you to just start. Just try. Just be real, be human, be authentic. But I know so many leaders now that are doing weekly short video messages to their employees, so that everybody, working at home, being virtual or in the hybrid workplace, they get a message from their boss, just updating them on stuff. And they throw in a little bit of humor. They talk about some of the things that they might be missing at the office because they're still working at home, some of the highlights, but they also keep it very real, very personal, very authentic. And I think employees really, really appreciate that. And then the third thing, and I'm a huge fan of these, again, during normal times, but especially now, we need to think about this stuff, is look for opportunities to create just a few rituals or traditions. Rituals and traditions are key ways of building a strong culture. They give everybody something to look forward to, something to reminisce about, and they create that sense of shared history that becomes part of that bond of building a strong, vibrant workplace culture. So look for some opportunities. Maybe it's a Monday morning kickoff Zoom huddle where you just get everybody kind of ramped up and excited for the week, or a hump day. Every Wednesday you do let's get everyone over the hump. Let's do a quick check-in call, see how everyone's doing. What are your highlights so far? What's your challenge for the next days? Or maybe it's the end of the week, something. Maybe it's a fun, goofy ritual. Here's one of my favorite ones, right? I have thousands of these examples. One of my favorite ones is a company, and you can do this virtually in your virtual meetings. Every Thursday, they hold something called Third Person Thursdays, where everybody talks about themselves, but in the third person. So they refer to themselves in the third person, right? So Mike loves that idea. Hey, Mike, I'll see you at the meeting later on, George. Hey, Mike has an idea. Like, it's so stupid, right? But it's easy for the introverts. It's easy for everyone to get involved. How can you not smile all day if everybody's talking in the third person? So many things that you can do, but I just urge leaders to start somewhere and do something. And remember the importance of connecting and communicating like never before.
My guest today is Michael Kerr. Remember to whine now and forever hold your peace.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Torok.